Part 239. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2385. Seeing that he understood, Gu Zhong smiled relievedly, and said in a low voice, Master Luo, your Majesty is a person who is nostalgic. You have been with His Majesty for several years, and he is used to using you, as long as you deal with it under your hand. Clean and restrained, your Majesty will naturally not blame him. Lord Luo looked at Gu Zhong, and nodded slightly after a while, accepting his suggestion. Lord Luo is easy to talk about, but the inner servants in charge of the inner servants and the full inner servants of the palace are not so easy to raise their hands and let them go. Avoiding people, Quan Mai turned his head and glanced at Gu Zhong, who was standing beside him, and said with a sneer, Master Gu is really a good trick. I wonder how I offended Master Gu. Gu Zhong said with a flat face, all the servants are joking. Which of us is not loyal to His Majesty? What does it matter if you offend me or not? And how many years have we worked together in the inner palace? When did you and I have a gap? The waiter snorted coldly, glanced at the waiter who was sitting in the chair beside him, coughing in a low voice, and flung his sleeves to the yard. It seemed that people coming and going were moving the account books, and the abacus was making a crackling sound, which made people very irritable. As soon as he left, only Gu Zhong and Tong Mai were left in the room. The servant boy was not in good health, so he covered his mouth with a handkerchief and coughed a few times, then took another sip of tea to suppress the itch in his throat, and then said softly, Master Gu is trying to make your apprentice take the top. Gu Zhong smiled and said, isn't all the work in this palace reserved for the capable ones? The servant boy nodded slightly, that's right, I'll leave the inner servant to him in the future. My son is a bit stupid. I don't know when he was eaten in the palace. I also asked Lord Gu to raise your hand and let him go. Zhuangzili will serve me forever. Looking at the white-haired servant boy, the smile on Gu Zhong's face faded a little, but his face softened a lot. He nodded slightly, I'll go see Master Tong at that time. The servant boy nodded, it's easy to say, it's easy to say. The servant boy was only over 40, and before he was 50, the whole person had aged quite a bit. Gu Zhong calculated the time and felt that he had only a few years left. He is not a person who kills all kinds of things. Imperial Physician Lu stood in front of the hospital door with his hands together, watching Zhou Man hand over a letter to Lu Sunyang, and he knew that she kept Sunyang in order to tell the family the news from him. Imperial Physician Lu smiled and shook his head, leaning against the door without speaking. Sunyang came forward to salute him, Grandfather, I'm back. Imperial Physician Lu waved, go back, it will be dark if you don't leave, and someone from your in-laws' house will be sent to pick you up. Sunyang smiled and said, there is a car at the entrance of Huangchuang, even if no one comes to pick it up, it is convenient to ask a car to go back. This is also because the number of people coming to and from Huangchuang has increased recently, and the villagers nearby drove ox carts or mule carts to win over business. However, when Lu Sunyang walked to the entrance of Huangchuang, she saw Zhou Lizhong, her eyes brightened, and she trotted forward with the medicine box. Why are you here? When did you come back from Zhuangzi? Zhou Lizhong stretched out his hand to take the medicine box in her hand, put it in the car first, and said, I came back this afternoon, and the fifth uncle sent a letter to me, saying that our Zhuangzi wants to do business with Huangchuang, and he is afraid of himself. If you can't figure it out, let me come back and help. He helped his wife into the car and asked, are you tired today? Lu Sunyang smiled and said, fortunately, my master is inside, my grandfather is there, and everyone takes good care of me. Zhou Lizhong led the horse to turn around, got into the carriage, and asked, is your aunt okay? Lu Sunyang didn't sit in the carriage either, she sat on the carriage with him, nodded and said, it's good. By the way, Master also asked me to bring back a letter to young Master Bai. The couple went home talking, while Man Bao and Imperial Dr. Lu leaned against the door frame and looked up at the sunset. Man Bao sighed, "It's so beautiful." Imperial Physician Lu smiled and said, "It's only near dusk, and it will soon disappear." When Imperial Physician Lu came out and saw the two of them looking up at the sky, he couldn't help rolling his eyes. If Imperial Physician Lu was too old, he would have thought they were in a relationship. But Dr. Lu was not polite, and called them loudly, "The dinner is ready, Dr. Lu, Dr. Zhou, hurry up and work." Imperial Dr. Lu said slowly, "No hurry, no hurry, anyway, I have to work overtime at night, while the sunset is still there, we will reward you more." "Yeah," Man Bao agreed, "anyway, you have to stay up all night with the lights on and enjoy the beautiful scenery while the sunset is good. Why bother fighting for this moment?" Dr. Lu turned around and left. Man Bao and Imperial Physician Lu continued to lean on the door to watch the setting sun in the sky, and when the last twilight disappeared, the two of them looked back, turned their necks, and went back to dinner together. Imperial Physician Lu was sitting at the dining table all by himself. When he saw them coming, he picked up the tableware and glanced at them. Imperial Physician Lu stepped forward and sat down with a smile. After holding the bowl and chopsticks, he said with a smile, "I didn't expect Imperial Physician Lu to wait for us specially. It's rude and disrespectful." Man Bao also said with a smile that it was rude, and sat down together before starting to eat. They were really busy. After eating, they sat and rested for a while, then lit the lights and went to the pharmacy to continue preparing the vaccinia until late at night. Imperial Physician Lu was getting old, and after sitting for a long time, he couldn't move a little. Finally, Imperial Physician Lu and Zhou Man helped him out. The hot water in the kitchen has been prepared, and as soon as they came out, someone immediately put the water into the bathroom. The three waited for them to go far before entering, and tried their best not to contact people during this time. After Man Bao washed his hair and body, he yawned and went back to the house. Zibing and Julan immediately went to wipe her hair. "My lady shouldn't wash her hair at this time." "No way, I always feel dirty when I come out of the pharmacy." Man Bao yawned, sat cross-legged on the couch to let them wipe their hair, and warned, "There will be a lot of imperial doctors coming tomorrow, and we are going to start pox vaccinations. In the next time, if you have nothing to do, you should travel far away, and if you meet people outside, keep your distance and talk, remember to wear a mask." Zibing and Julan responded, and Julan said, "Ma'am, we sewed some masks in the past 2 days." Man Bao yawned and nodded, her voice gradually lowered. She lowered her eyes and said, "Keep it, it will definitely be needed." Early the next morning, Xiao Yuanzhang brought a few imperial physicians and medical assistants over. He ordered some people to get started, and the rest were on the sidelines. Everyone brought the prepared smallpox vaccine to vaccinate people. When the people living in the ward saw so many adults coming, they were all uneasy with the things in their hands, and some even fought with each other, almost kneeling on the ground. Man Bao knew they were scared, but there was no better way than to reassure them that it was no big deal. Xiao Yuanzhang took a thick needle, looked at Zhou Man, and Man Bao took the lead to show everyone how to get acne. "It's very late, everyone go to bed first. I'm not sure if I can add more tonight, let me try it out." Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2386. The person who was caught by Zhou Man shivered. Man Bao noticed his trembling, so he raised his head and smiled at him. Unfortunately, she was wearing a mask. She thought it was a sinister laugh, so she trembled even more, her whole body softened, and she slipped to the ground, shaking her lips and said, "Forgive your life, spare your life, my lord, spare your life." Man Bao, is she so scary? Man Bao looked back at Xiao Yuanzhang. Xiao Yuanzhang frowned slightly, greeting the steward beside him angrily, "How did you choose the person? It doesn't matter if there is a problem with what you eat and drink, Now even people have problems. The steward broke out in cold sweat and waved his hand to ask someone to drag him down, but Joe Man raised his hand to stop her. She put one hand on his shoulder, stared at the shivering young man and asked, "Have you been instructed to go out these days? Sunbathing, walking around?" The young man was startled for a moment, then swallowed nervously, and nodded again and again. Man Bao asked briskly, "Have you seen the veterans and remnants living in the house over there?" The young man nodded, and Man Bao felt his body relax a little, so he continued to ask, "Have you spoken to them?" The young man replied in a low voice, "I did." Man Bao, "Then you should know that they all have acne. Have you seen the acne marks on their bodies?" The young man hesitated for a moment, but nodded. "Since you have seen it, you should know that there are not many poxes from cowpox. Look at them, some are old enough to have gray hair, some are disabled with arms and legs, and the healthiest ones also have 1 or 2 spots on their bodies. Injury, although they are soldiers who went to the battlefield to kill the enemy, their bodies are really not as healthy as yours, so they can all survive the smallpox vaccine, and it will be easier for you. Man Bayadao, in our Thai hospital, the vaccination is not to make people suffer from smallpox, but to prevent more people from getting smallpox in the future. So our purpose is to cure smallpox, you can rest assured." I felt that the young man had relaxed a lot, although he was still shaking. He wouldn't look like he was going to faint. Man Bao quickly stabbed the inside of his arm. He only felt pain, and then saw Joe Man put something on his wound. Dr. Lu, who had been waiting, immediately took a strip of cloth and tied it up. Man Bao put his hand away and smiled with him. "It's all right, the blood will stop soon, and the cloth strip can be taken off after a while." It was very fast. When all 6 people in a room had been pricked and vaccinated, everyone waited in the room for a while and then untied the cloth strips and threw the pox in a fine sack together. Everyone went all the way to vaccinate. This is not something that can be done in one day. Xiao Yuanzheng decided to complete it in 2 days. The used vaccinia was taken to a room for destruction. There was a stove in it. A fire was lit early. The temperature inside was the highest at this time. Before leaving, Xiao Yuan told Zhou Man and Imperial Physician Lu, who were staying behind, "This thing is a big killer, you must keep an eye on it. Things can only be left within these 3 levels, not to mention outside Huangchuang, you can't get out outside the checkpoint." Man Bao and Imperial Physician Lu responded earnestly. Man Bao instantly thought of Xiao Yuanzhen's operations and the various conspiracies in the books he had read before, so he lowered his voice and asked him, "Do you suspect that someone wants to steal the smallpox vaccine to frame our Thai hospital?" Xiao Yuanzheng, Imperial Dr. Zhou is really smart. If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't have thought of this. He was just worried that someone would steal this thing out and harm others. As for harming the Thai hospital, there was no such method. He just made an offer to ask for money, and the hatred was not that deep. However, when Zhou Man said this, he also felt a little nervous, so he said, "I have already told the guards, including us, that things on the entry and exit gates should also be searched, and things suspected of smallpox vaccinia should be checked. Takeout is not allowed, as well as our clothes, shoes, and socks. You can only go in, not go out." Man Bao was shocked and asked, "Then our clothes at the end?" "Burn them all," Xiao Yuanzheng said. "Do you think that room is only used to burn vaccinia? There are too many things to burn." Man Bao felt distressed and said to Zibing Julan after returning home, "I knew I should bring a few less clothes, 2 of them are still very good looking. I originally thought of going out for an outing and putting them on." "Julan, my lady, I think it's hard to catch up with the outing." Man Bao immediately said, "Bah, bah, stop the crow's mouth." Man Bao sat on the couch looking outside and sighed, "I don't know how the 5th brother and the steward are talking. I will ask Xiao Yuanzheng tomorrow, and I don't know if the steward will report to Xiao Yuanzheng." Wu Lang and the others had already agreed, and when they came in the morning, they were one step behind Xiao Yuan Zheng. Because Xiao Yuan was saying hello, they met the manager directly as soon as they arrived. This time the conversation was much smoother than the last time. There will be no more buyers who keep raising prices and sellers who keep lowering prices. Case. But this time it wasn't a normal bargain, because the other party agreed as soon as Friday Lang made an offer, and there was no struggle at all, neither raised the price nor lowered the price, and there was no dispute about the quantity that Wu Lang and the others could provide. Just respond directly. Then in less than half an hour, they signed the contract, signed it directly, and the steward paid them a deposit. He personally sent the person to the entrance of Huangchuang, and looked at Wu Lang with a half-smiling smile. I really didn't expect that Lord Friday was so powerful. It's a young man who doesn't know gold and jade, and he offended him earlier. Wu Lang was puzzled, but he immediately said, "My lord is joking, where does our small family have any backing?" Zhou Lizhong on the side smiled and said, "No matter how big our backing is, it is not as effective as adults. The so-called magistrates are not as good as now. In the future, our uncles and nephews hope that adults will take care of them more." The steward was stunned for a moment, and after a moment he said with a sense of loss, "Young Master Zhou is very polite, but I want to take care of the two of you, but I'm afraid I won't have a chance." Wu Wulang and Zhou Lizhong were puzzled, and when they delivered the first batch of eggs, broilers, chickens and vegetables as agreed on the third day, they found out that the manager had changed. And it's not just a change of stewards. I heard that more than half of the stewards of the Imperial Hospital in Huangzhuang have changed. The two of them looked at each other and were a little confused. When Lu Sunyang returned, she told them, "It's a small matter, but the big thing is that the chief officials of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications have all changed. I heard that the internal servants and stewards in charge of purchasing have been changed from the outside to the inside. If you are lucky, you will just be transferred elsewhere. If you are unlucky, you will be directly assigned to various imperial villages to do coolies." Friday Lang opened his mouth wide and asked, "For what?" Lu Sunyang didn't speak. Why? Of course, it was because the person in charge of purchasing was too greedy, which made Xiao Yuan Zheng unhappy. But she heard her grandfather mention it. It was because of a bragging line from her master, bragging about how good the village she was running in the village was, and then. Lu Sunyang shook her head, removed all the distracting thoughts from her mind, and said to the two, "Anyway, this matter has little to do with us, we don't want to get involved, just give the goods honestly, but I heard that the Huangzhuang side plans to reopen looking for suppliers, the prices of those who have been supplied before are also inflated, and Xiao Yuan is not very satisfied." Zhou Lizhong's eyes brightened and he became thoughtful. "See you tomorrow." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2387. Zhou Lizhong incited Wu Wulang privately, "Uncle 5, you are very familiar with these purchases in the capital, why don't you try to take over the purchases from Huangchuang? If you do well, maybe you can provide some vegetables, meat, and eggs to the palace." Wu Wulang scratched his head. "Actually, I have always had a question, doesn't the emperor himself have a very large Huangchuang? They don't raise chickens, ducks, or pigs in their village. Why do they need to buy so much from outside?" Zhou Lizhong also became suspicious. After thinking about it for a while, he hesitated and said, "Because there are too many people in the palace and I eat a lot, so I can't afford it." "Impossible," said Friday Lang, "I seem to have heard Man Bao say that the emperor has two in the imperial palace in the capital, and there is a large piece of land in Yangzhou, and the Yangzhou one is also intended for Princess Mingda. Dowry." Uncle and nephew can only go to Bai Shan if they don't understand. Bai Shan didn't even think about this question. He was stunned when he was suddenly asked, and then said, probably the supply is not enough. It seems that there are not many people who raise these in Huangchuang. He paused and said, there are tenant farmers who work in Huangchuang, but more are the family members of criminal officials, as well as prisoners who have been punished as criminal slaves for other reasons. But it's not difficult for you to buy in the palace, Bai Shan said. Actually, some of the medicinal materials purchased by the Imperial Physician Office from outside have always been donated by Brother Thursday. The opportunity to supply Huangzhuang this time, you can try to get in touch with the purchase from the palace. Bai Shan smiled and said, you don't have to eat too much in one go, just offer one or two things first, such as eggs and duck eggs. These things can be kept for a long time. Just be careful during the transportation process. The rules of the business, people also know about the same, and then it will be much simpler to buy and buy business. Wu Wulang heard his implication and asked, do you think it's not good to pick up shopping in the palace? Bai Shan shook his head slowly and said, it's not bad, it's just that you need to be more careful when you take over the business in the palace, and you have to be careful. But there are disadvantages, there are advantages. You may not make a lot of money for shopping in the palace, but with this status, your business outside will be much smoother, that is, doing other things, others will mention it. You should also be polite, Bai Shan said, except for cloth, tea, and salt, the merchants supplying the imperial palace rarely make money. They only make money from outside. Zhou Lishong pondered, just like our family, I know that the yam tablets and privet seeds grown in our family are supplied to the Imperial Physician Department, and many pharmacies outside have placed orders with our family. In the past, we always had to go to a few more medicinal materials from our family. Only pharmacies can sell at the right price, but now people are rushing to ask for it as soon as it is pulled to the capital, even if it is a pen or two more expensive than other people's homes, they don't care. Bai Shan nodded, that's the truth. He said, if the eggs in Zhuangzi are supplied to the palace, you can sell them outside for a penny more than others. Friday Lang said, so, it is normal for them to buy 5 cents or 6 cents for an egg. Bai Shan, no, the reason why your eggs are higher than that is because you supply the palace, so it seems that the eggs are more noble than other eggs, but except for some people, who will be because of the eggs. Did you buy it at a high price and eat it from the same nest that was supplied to the palace? He said, I want you to buy eggs on the street. They are all good eggs. Do you want to buy eggs for 2 cents apiece, or buy an egg that is said to be eaten by emperors for 3 cents? On Friday, Uncle Lang and nephew said in unison, of course I bought 2 cents. Wu Wulang only vaguely understood, so it's still not possible to increase the price with the palace, and it may not be possible to increase the price outside, but some people want to eat the eggs that the emperor has eaten, so they will pay higher prices to buy them. Even if this is not the case. The same person, it is also 2 cents, I shouted and said that this is the egg that the emperor has also eaten, and it will definitely sell better than other people's eggs. Bai Shan smiled and nodded, this is the benefit of the royal business. Wu Wulang felt pride in his heart, and felt that this business could be done. At that time, he would send some rice, noodles, chicken, duck, fish, and meat produced in Zhuangzi to the palace, regardless of whether the emperor would eat it or not. Anyway, he sent it to the palace. Looking back on the New Year's Day, are you afraid that you won't be able to sell it? There are a lot of things in Zhuangzi, so although a lot can be sold, there are also many that cannot be sold. In the end, they all pull back and eat by themselves. But they have a lot of family and they have a restaurant, so they don't have to worry about it, but Man Bao has been promoted again. Last year, the job field given by her promotion to Xiaohu to treat smallpox will be planted this year. The job field will also be allocated. Wu Lang I calculated, turned his head and said heavily to Zhou Li, if the palace is willing to ask for our things, you can grow the newly approved farmland in the future, and you can raise as many chickens and ducks as you want. If you can't sell them in the capital, you can bring them to Yangzhou. If we sell it in other places, as long as it is the chicken and duck that the emperor has eaten, our price is the same as other places, and they will definitely be willing to buy it. Bai Shan, then the emperor outside will eat too much in the future, I'm afraid it will bloom everywhere. On Friday, Uncle Lang and nephew were gearing up for a big fight. So the next day, after the fresh vegetables and eggs were delivered from Yangzhou, I personally delivered them to Huangchuang, and had a good talk with the new steward from Huangchuang. After a few days, Wu Wulang received 2 more purchases from the steward, but the ones in their village were not good enough, so he personally went to the market to buy them. Because the quantity was large, he lowered the price a little, and then sold them at the market price to Huangchuang. In this part, he basically earned a carriage fee, but he did get in touch with the purchasing at the palace through the steward. Friday Lang was very happy, knowing that there was beef for sale in the market. He also spent money to buy 2 large pieces of beef back, one to send to Bai's house, and one for his own evening celebration. When Mrs. Lu saw the beef, she smiled and said, "Let's make shaozai, it's still cold now, and the shaozai can be kept for a few days. It's good to eat shaozai noodles every morning." Shanbao and Erlang are not always talking about wanting to eat it. When Aunt Rong heard it, she immediately took the beef and went to look for Mrs. There are only pickled bamboo shoots in the Zhou family, and the scorpions made by Xiao Qian's are indeed the best. Xiao Qian was hesitating, and when she saw her carrying the meat and said to be a sham, she smiled and said, "I'm having a headache, I want to make beef slices, but I want to make some sham for Xiao Gongzi and Man Bao, this one. Some are not enough." Yi also said with a smile, "Our old lady said that the young masters have been talking about it recently. It's cold in the spring. When you get up to study in the morning, you want to eat something warm. I make sangzi and put it away. It's good to give them a bowl of noodles every morning. I can also send some to Miss Man so that she can eat better in it. See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2388. What Wu Wulang didn't know was that when he took the order for the eggs from the palace, Zhou Man and the others had succeeded in half of their experiments. The people who had been vaccinated began to develop acne, and the average amount of acne was not large, except for very few people. Everyone's acne volume is between 1 and 6. 78% of people have a low-grade fever, and the remaining 22% have a high fever, but it is currently under control. When the news came back to the imperial city, everyone was overjoyed, including the emperor. Because the anger of finding that the money in his inner treasury had been embezzled by his subordinates was not small, he even dealt with the series of people who were found out more gently. Then ask for guilt. Due to poor supervision, Tong Nei was also deprived of his official position and released from the palace, but the queen remembered that he had worked hard for many years, so he allowed him to take his personal luggage. Gu Zhong personally went to stare at him to pack his things, and let him turn a blind eye and put some more things in his luggage. The inner servant's godson carried the big bag and the small bag on his back, and helped the inner servant to go out. Gu Zhong glanced at the little boy's maid, and said to the boy's maid, "It's a blessing to have such a son by your side at your age." The servant boy coughed softly, "Thank you for raising your hand." He smiled coldly and said, "Gu's inner servant is not too young, and it is time to prepare for the future. I don't know if your 2 apprentices have my son's filial piety." Gu Zhong smiled slightly, "Thank you, Master Tong, for your suggestion." He stretched out his hand and gave him a handkerchief, and said, "If you go to Huangchuang, you can find a way to see the imperial Dr. Zhou, but it may not be able to cure your disease, but it is possible to make you walk more comfortably in the last days." The servant boy glanced at the handkerchief that Gu Zhong handed over, smiled slightly, stretched out his hand to take it, and stuffed it into his arms. Because a group of people have been dispatched in the palace, the newly appointed stewards are more cautious. The things that Wu Wulang brought are not top-notch, but they are definitely not bad. Considering his relationship with Zhou Man, they were a lot tolerant towards him. And because the previous batch of stewards were replaced, the Zhuangzi who provided these agricultural products before were also implicated to some extent. Even if there was no guilt, some of them were replaced. At this time, it was the people who were in urgent need of supplies. If you don't give Wu Wulang, you have to give it to others. In this case, it's better to sell Zhuman one. You must know that Zhou Man's popularity in the palace is very good, not only to please the empress, princes and princesses, but also many people who are in favor of her. At the right time and place, Wu Wulang quickly took over the cost of eggs in the palace. The supply was once every 3 days, and the amount was not very large. At least now Zhuangzi can provide it, and he is also looking for some farmers to cooperate with them. They take eggs there and feed them to the palace. Wu Wulang, Zhou Dalan, and others discussed, but this is not a long-term solution. I think this chicken should be raised by itself. Zhou Dalan also nodded, yes, eggs in the capital are expensive now. You buy them from outside for 2 cents a piece, and then sell them to the palace for 2 cents. What did you earn? He said, the farmland that was allocated last year is not very far from our Zhuangzi. There are more than 10 acres of dry sandy land there. I can only grow beans, but I'm afraid it won't be very productive. Free up the ground to plant some vegetables and beans, and then all of them will be used to raise chickens, and the chicken coop will be built on the side. Qian Shi, who had been sitting there listening to their discussion, suddenly said, if you keep chickens together, you will get sick. Zhou Dalan, isn't Man Bao a doctor? Let her prescribe medicine for the chicken. Qian, Man Bao is a man who treats people, but can't treat animals, right? However, the old Zhutu said, if our cows in 8 villages are sick, wouldn't they also ask old Dr. Lu to get medicine? I think so. Even Wu Wulang nodded and said, yes, people can eat chicken and duck. I think it's almost the same. Then I'll find Man Beiji. Old Zhutu also felt that he could not work in vain, and said, since you want to do it, you should discuss it with the tenant farmers who rented the land. When that time comes, they will do the work, or we should hire someone else, and, the chicks should also be ready, and the chicks can go out to forage on their own when it's hot. Zhou Dalan immediately said, I will discuss with the tenants in Zhuangzi when I go back, and let them hatch the eggs and raise them when the weather is hot. Wu Wulang immediately said, Big brother, go to a few villages in Yangzhou to find them. If you have eggs, buy more eggs. Now not only the palace, but also the Huangchuang. Hey, isn't it that people who say pox don't eat fishy, have stopped eggs? Another group of people have been selected. Recently, they are taking care of their health. I heard that they will start getting pox after about 10 days. Zhou Dalan thought for a while and said, then I'll ask a few businessmen. They walk the streets and alleys, and they must know which village has more eggs. Now that the first month of the month has passed, the cost of eggs must be less and less, and the price in Yangzhou has dropped. Old Zhutu said, you just keep chickens. Don't you keep some ducks? Father, the newly allocated work field has little water and is far from the river, so it's not easy to raise ducks. Then you can raise pigs. I don't think pork in Beijing is cheap now. I don't really want to raise pigs, said Wu Wulang, I've already inquired about it. The masters in the palace seldom eat this pork. Most of this meat is eaten by the maids and servants. The emperor's family loves to eat mutton and beef. And chicken. The old Zhou had tapped him on the head, the emperor only has one stomach. How much money can you make by serving his stomach? But there are thousands of people eating in this palace. If you can take over part of the pork business, How much can you earn then, will it be settled? But what is it? Anyway, if you sell your own pigs, you sell them to take out, but don't you sell them in the palace, old Jotio you said, you don't have to worry about selling them after you have raised them. Where does the good thing come from? Wu Wulang muttered, but dad, pigs eat a lot, and it's too difficult to raise. A pig needs to be raised for a year, and the supply to the palace is provided every day. Where can I find pork for them? I bought it from the market at the market price and sold it to the palace at the market price, and I changed hands. If I don't make a penny, I have to put money in. The old Zhutu said, then you raise the pig first, and then you can sell it in the palace. If you can't do it, you can sell it outside. We also have a restaurant in our house. In short, there is no shortage of places to go. Friday Lang thought it was true, so he looked at Joe Dallin. Joe Dallin, okay, let's see where the pigsty is built, but if you raise too many pigs, you will get sick. Old Zhutu, looking for Manbao, she can even cure chickens, and naturally she can also cure pigs. He said, you are lazy, and you dislike raising pigs is hard and tasteful, don't think I don't know. Brother Joe Dallin, why do you ask for it now that you know it? And, in terms of laziness, who is the laziest? Both Joe Dallin and Wu Wulang felt that it was because the old Jotio you didn't have to do this, so he was so able to command. Qian Shi also glanced at Lao Zhou's head, and after successfully making him lower his head, he said to his two sons, there is no hurry to raise pigs, you can get your chickens done first. Joe Dallin's father, son, and brothers all breathed a sigh of relief. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2389. Man Bao, who did not know that he could cure chickens and was about to cure pigs, was standing on the ridge with his hands folded, watching people in the distance turning the straw covering the wheat field. The weather has been good for the past 2 days, and it seems to be getting warmer. Turning out the straw and letting the wheat seedlings grow faster in the sun will make them grow faster. The fields in front of Manbao were empty, and they should be reserved for rice cultivation. Zibing stood behind Manbao and said enviously, Sir, the fields here are really nice and the weather is nice. No wonder they always heard that the Central Plains were very rich when they were in the western regions. It turned out that their fields were so good. Manbao smiled at her and sighed, spring is here, how many days until the Mingjing exam? Zibing didn't know, so Julan replied, there are still 7 days. Julan glanced at the distance, walked to Manbao and whispered, Miss, look over there, 2 people have been watching you. Manbao turned his head and saw a man carrying a hoe. There was another man standing beside him. Because it was too far away, Manbao couldn't see the person clearly, but from his demeanor, he seemed to be an old man. Manbao squinted and looked at it, and couldn't help asking Julan and Zibing, can you see who they are? Zibing had the best eyes, and after looking at it for a while, he said, one looks in his 30s, the other looks like his grandson, and the old one looks like silk and satin. There are not many people in this village who can wear silk and satin except for the management. Julan said, Miss, they are looking at you, they look like 2 father-in-laws. There are many father-in-laws in this village. Manbao thought for a while and said to Julan, go and ask. Julan responded and walked towards them. Seeing Julan rushing towards them, the servant boy covered his mouth with a handkerchief and coughed softly, and said softly, young people are just curious, this is not a good thing, in that palace, there is no place for it's just curiosity. The little boy's inner servant said, Godfather, I saw Imperial Physician Zhou in a while. If you talk softly, she will cure you if you don't think so. The servant boy said lightly, if it can't be cured, didn't I ask Imperial Physician Lu for help? It's just a few prescriptions. Beijing and the palace both say that Imperial Physician Zhou is a little magician. The servant boy smiled and said, Stupid child, Beijing called her a genius doctor because she can open belly and treat infertility. How much does it have to do with my disease? When it comes to my internal disease, the most effective one, it's still Xiao Yuan Zheng and Imperial Physician Lu. The little boy's servant was a little annoyed. Xiao Yuan Zheng can't be invited. The servant boy said indifferently, how many people in this capital can invite Xiao Yuan Zheng? Except for those super-ranked princes and marquis, only the foreign ministers of the third rank have the opportunity to invite him. That is, it's hard for the ladies in the palace to invite him, let alone me as a eunuch. The little boy's servant's face turned red, and he wanted to speak, but the boy's servant said lightly, the person has arrived. As soon as he looked up, he saw that a maid next to Zhou Tai had carefully walked over with a skirt. But before she got close, the guards patrolling saw it, and immediately rushed over to stop them, pointing at them and shouting, what are you doing? You are not allowed to cross the fence, and anyone who violates them will be shot. Julan was startled. She stopped and waited for the guards to run over before patting her chest and saying, you scared me to death, I didn't even think about going over the fence. The guards who were about to reprimand her choked, and when they looked at her, they were so familiar with them that the veins on their foreheads jumped. Miss Julan, what's that about you? He turned his head to look at the father and son of the servant boy on the opposite side, and couldn't help frowning. Who are you? I don't know that this is an epidemic area, so you shouldn't approach it. The servant boy covered his mouth and coughed. The servant boy immediately put down his hoe and supported the servant boy with both hands. Sir, we didn't cross the fence and didn't dare to go in. It's because the old doctor of Zhou has entrusted him, so we came here. Yes, I just want to give Zhou Imperial Doctor something. Julan looked at the guards innocently, pointed at Zhou Man and said, Nyo, Our Lady is over there, she has never approached outsiders, she just asked me to come and spread the word. The guards are used to passing things and letters to Zhou Man during this period of time, and they are soft-hearted. They can't say hard words at the moment, they can only stand aside and stare at the two servants in a rough voice. Said, if you have anything to say, hurry up, and in the future, if you want to send a message, you can only go to the checkpoint, and you are not allowed to come over without permission. Although they surrounded the epidemic area with wooden sticks and hemp ropes, even a child could cross it with a lift. This thing can't stop people at all, it just makes people in Huangzhuang know the hearts of people. People inside are not allowed to cross these fences to go out, and people outside are not allowed to cross these fences to go in. It is all up to everyone's self-consciousness. Although the guards patrolled, they couldn't keep their eyes on such a large epidemic area, so they were very dissatisfied with the behavior of the two servants. Although Imperial Physician Zhou always communicated with the outside world, only letters were always sent out, and they were all through formal channels. Their checkpoints always sent beautiful and warm cakes, and they didn't find it troublesome. They felt that Imperial Physician Zhou was a well-behaved person. If it weren't for the two servants and servants here to lure them, Imperial Physician Zhou would not have done anything to embarrass them. Therefore, they glared at the two servants, the father and son, and seemed very unfriendly. Child servant. Even the servant boy was silent for a while, then took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and handed it over, and said to Julan, this handkerchief was given by an old friend of Zhou Tai, and the little lady gave it to Zhou Tai, and Zhou Tai would know it. Clear. The imperial guard stepped forward, took the handkerchief over, flipped it back and forth, but couldn't see anything, so he handed it to Julan. They mainly prevent the contents from being handed out. As for the contents outside, as long as they are not contraband, they generally don't care. Julan took the veil and asked, I don't know what the two masters are called. The little boy's maid bent down and said, don't dare to be, our father and son are surnamed Tong. Julan looked at them in surprise, looked up and down the two, nodded, and went back after salute. She handed the handkerchief to Man Bao, and said with a strange expression, Ma'am, I heard them speak softly, just like the servants who have come to the mansion, and their faces are white and beardless. I thought they were also. Who knows them? It turns out to be a father and son. Strange, why doesn't that old man have a beard? Man Bao took the veil and looked at it, but didn't see anything, and explained indifferently, who said that the servant can't be a father and son? They all said the surname is Tong, it should be the servant and his godson. Julan, child's maid. Oh, you don't know, it's the young prisoner's inner servant who used to be in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. After hearing from Imperial Physician Lu, the person was put in our Imperial Palace, but he is old, and His Majesty is kind and generous. He did not punish him for labor, but let him come to Huangzhuang to retire, and he will serve him as a son. Man Bao pondered for a moment, slammed his mouth and said, it's also from the 4th rank, and it's as big as my official position. Unfortunately, it's gone now. Julan and Zibing, there is half of your reason here, right? So happy, tomorrow is the 4th, and my nephew and niece are going to school. It's really tiring to take them out to play today, so I won't add more tonight. Starting tomorrow, I'll start fulfilling what Mo Yan said every day for 5 days. The beast is finally going to be locked in a cage, happy. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2390. Man Bao really couldn't see anything, so he asked Julan with the handkerchief. He only gave the handkerchief, didn't he say anything? Julan, it was said that it was given by an old friend of the lady, and that the lady would understand after seeing it. Man Bao looked at the handkerchief in his hand again and again, but couldn't tell. What's the mystery of this handkerchief? Julan, miss, this veil was made by Sister Mei. Man Bao stared, did they know Mei? Julan, miss, this veil is made for you. The orchid embroidered on it is the one raised on Mr. Zhuang's desk. Man Bao stared at the bluegrass on the veil before saying, really? But she saw bluegrass on the handkerchiefs of many people, and they all looked the same. Julan said, Sister Wu has only made this handkerchief for my wife. Mei and Julan seldom waited in front of Manbao, but they were called to Manbao, and they had to do a lot of things. Washing clothes, collecting clothes, folding clothes, and cleaning the house were daily routines, but because Joe Man during the day, I was rarely at home, so I didn't see it. In addition to these, they also need to give Joe Man some small things such as clothes and sachets. The purses, sachets, and handkerchiefs on Manbao's body were not bought from outside. They used to be the help of the third sister-in-law of the Zhou family. After coming to Beijing, Manbao used them. It's just that Manbao didn't know it. Every so often in May, he would bring a plate of purse sachets for Manbao to choose from. But Julan, who gets along with Mei day and night, knows that she is also very familiar with Mei's needle and thread. She just saw at a glance that this is Mei's needle and thread. And this veil is indeed only available to Zhou Man, and that's why she accepts the veil. She thought that Zhou Man would know, but now it seems that the lady doesn't know as much as she does. Julan said, Miss, think about it carefully, who have you given the veil to? This thing is very important, and it is generally not allowed to be given to outsiders. Man Bao said, I know, Aunt Zheng taught me that my handkerchief was only used by Bai Shan and Bai Er, not even Yin He, except for them. Man Bao thought hard and hesitated, Master Gu. Julan was somewhat appetizing, which Master Gu? It's Gu Zonggu's inner servant beside His Majesty. Julan felt relieved in an instant, and asked, then this handkerchief was given by the ancient servant to the child servant. But they are friends. Man Bao was at a loss, but Imperial Physician Lu said that Gu Zhong took advantage of this opportunity to have his apprentice replace Xiao Tong's inner servant, and directly took over the position of the inner servant of Tong's inner servant, the provincial junior supervisor, in the palace. In the middle, the internal servants are almost over when they do this, and the next step is Gu Zhong's position, serving directly by His Majesty's side, occasionally helping to draft some documents and the like, in order to be a third-rank official. Doesn't it mean that taking a person's career is like killing one's parents? They are all revenge for killing their father, how can they still give a handkerchief? Man Bao was puzzled. But she thought about it carefully, and indeed, apart from Bai Shan and Bai Erlang, her handkerchief was also Gu Zhong. At that time, when the Queen Mother was seriously ill, Man Bao and Imperial Physician Lu followed Ho in the side hall, and Gu Zhong ran back and forth to pass all kinds of news. As a result, it was dark and he accidentally stepped on the grass beside the green bricks. The foot slipped. At that time, the Empress Dowager was dying, the Emperor was sad, and many things in the palace needed Gu Zhong's instructions. If something happened to him at that time, he might not be able to return to the Emperor in the future. There are more servants in the palace than palace maids, and the most important thing is talents. As long as he retires, more people will replace him. At that time, it was the Emperor's most sorrowful time, and the people who accompany him must have different feelings in the future. But at that time, Gu Zhong really couldn't move, twisted his waist and even had difficulty standing up. At that time, all the imperial physicians in the imperial hospital were waiting in the side hall of the Queen Mother, not to mention that they did not dare to be distracted at this time. Even if they dared, Gu Zhong would not move them. In the end, it was Gu Zhong's little apprentice who wiped his tears and walked up and down the window several times, which led Man Bao to ask a few questions. At that time, it was Gu Zhong, whom Man Bao followed his little apprentice to see. At that time, Gu Zhong did not dare to appear in front of people, so he could only hide in a small room without even hot water. After wiping off the blood on his hands, Man Bao adjusted a piece of ointment in that small room and put it on his waist, and then put a painkiller in it, and Gu Zhong just supported his waist and went out to do errands. The reason why Man Bao still remembers is because the Queen Mother didn't have it that night, and the Queen Mother also gave her several medical books. She has a deep memory. Moreover, Gu Zhong said that he would return her handkerchief, but it has not been returned since then. However, since Gu Zhong was a servant, Man Bao didn't pay much attention to it. Man Bao tucked the handkerchief into his sleeve. Forget it, I don't want to, just ask him directly when I get a chance. Julan was worried. Miss, what did the servant boy want you to do? Did he know that it was you who talked about eggs in front of Xiao Yuan Zheng that led to so many things, and he came to get revenge on you on purpose? Man Bao, impossible, I'll just gossip. Isn't the root cause of this incident corrupted by their internal ministers? Even if they don't reflect on themselves, they must look for enemies, then they should also look for Master Gu and Xiao Yuan Zheng. Julan, what if they bully the soft and fear the hard? Man Bao pinched his waist and said, I'm not a soft persimmon either. The cake on the side hesitated. Did you seek an adult for treatment? Both Man Bao and Julan looked over. Zibing said, our adults are imperial physicians, very powerful doctors, don't ordinary people seek medical treatment? Man Bao touched his chin and thought, that makes sense, I'll go back and ask Imperial Physician Lu. Zibing and Julan didn't understand why they asked Imperial Physician Lu, so they could only run back with her. Imperial Physician Lu wants to stay on duty with the two of them today. There is no way. The ward is now full of experimenters, and there are many people. Moreover, Xiao Yuan is buying the remaining 5 Western cattle from Zhou Man's family and revaccinating them, but this time, in addition to the Western cattle, there are also 2 of their local cattle. Xiao Yuan said righteously, it's just these few Western cows. We can't plant cowpox in the future. We have to go to the Western regions to buy a batch of cows back, right? Let's try ours first. Therefore, everyone has been busy recently, and it is rare to steal half a day. Imperial physician Lu sat in the yard and closed his eyes to bask in the sun. When he heard the movement, he opened his eyes to take a look, and saw Zhou Man running in with two maids. With a curious and excited look on his face, he closed his eyes angrily, turned over on the mat, and covered his face with the fan again. Man Bao glanced at Imperial physician Lu lying in the yard, went straight to Imperial physician Lu, and asked curiously, Dr. Lu, was the former servant of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the young clerk, sick? For the imperial physicians, being sick means being sick, not swearing. Imperial physician Lu nodded directly, he has a cold syndrome. See you at 4 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2391. Imperial physician Lu said, the cold is so cold that it is difficult to remove it. Every year from October to March of the following year, he is the most uncomfortable, especially in the 12th lunar month, when he basically can only lie in bed. Man Bao, then he can still be the young inspector of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Imperial physician Lu said with a smile, he is not like a foreign minister, he still needs to go to the court and hand over the affairs to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which will be handled by the chief officials of the bureaus, and the one handed over to him is also taken over by the inner servant of the child, and the inner servant of the child cannot solve it. Come, report to him and let him come up with an idea, why can't you do it? Imperial physician Lu picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea and said with a smile, the people in their palace are different from our foreign ministers. We are not officials, and there are plenty of places to go after resigning, but they can only die in the palace. Especially in the palace. It is a person like the servant boy, who can climb to that position, give countless favors, and naturally have countless hatreds. Those inner servants are the most aware of current affairs. Once he loses power, those who are close to him may not be willing to offend his enemies for him. It is already the best person who can avoid falling into trouble. Imperial Dr. Lu asked Zhou Man, what does Imperial Dr. Zhou think? Get up and ask him. Man Bao said, he came to me, but we haven't spoken yet. I guess he might want me to see a doctor for him. Imperial Dr. Lu, what's his pulse like? Imperial physician Lu thought for a while and said, I gave him a pulse 3 months ago. He paused and said, it's not good, the cold is in the body, I think there is still about a year left. Man Bao was surprised, so serious. How old is he? Imperial physician Lu said with a smile, I am 48 this year, and he has been suffering from cold symptoms for nearly 30 years. When he was young, he didn't know how to take care of it, and he didn't have the conditions to take care of it. That's how it came to be. But he can live now. Rare. Man Bao frowned, why is the cold so severe? Even women, few people have such a severe cold. Imperial physician Lu sighed and said, people like them are no different from women. This child servant was castrated early. I heard that he entered the palace at the age of 5 or 6. Therefore, the body did not develop, and the yang qi was insufficient. Imperial physician Lu paused and said, when the late emperor was still there, he served in the palace of the concubine Xiand. Because he offended the concubine, he was punished and knelt in the courtyard for a while. At night, cold water was poured on his body. At that time, it was still the 12th lunar month, let alone being poured cold water on him, he could freeze to death even if he was kneeling. But it's so strange. He knelt all night, and when he was carried down, he still had a breath. After he came back to life, he fell into a cold syndrome. He couldn't remove it when he was young. It can't be cured at all. Imperial physician Lu paused and said, his disease is as difficult as Yin Or's disease, and both are incurable diseases. Man Bao was surprised, but more excited, I can't wait to see you. Imperial physician Lu thought that she was now treating Yin Or like a normal person, and she was refreshed, you may go and have a look. You can cure Yin Or's illness, maybe his. Man Bao shook his head and said, Yin Or's illness is not healed, it's just to keep his body in a balance, the foundation is still thin, but as long as he keeps adjusting and the balance is not broken, his body will not be too big. The problem. This is also the best treatment plan that Man Bao and Mr. Mo can find. However, Teacher Mo also said that this kind of balance requires the patient to have an excellent mentality and a very peaceful living environment. Otherwise, as soon as his body feels uncomfortable and the balance is broken, it will be a mountain torrent, which is very dangerous thing. Man Bao rubbed his chin and thought, of course the cold syndrome has to be removed, and then return to Yang. However, considering the physical condition and age of the servant boy, Man Bao was also distressed, as if there was no particularly suitable recipe. Imperial physician Lu glanced at her and said, "It's February, and the weather is getting warmer. The more it goes down, the better the day will be for treating cold symptoms, but his body won't be able to support it." Man Bao said, "But I can't get out either." Imperial physician Lu smiled slightly and said, "You can't get out, but he can come in." He said leisurely, "Although he has been deprived of his official position, it is not difficult to find an excuse to live in this village." Man Bao looked at him curiously, "Dr. Lu, do you really want me to treat him? Why did you keep chasing her?" Imperial physician Lu smiled and said, "I owe him a favor. Although I don't know if you can cure him or not, I helped him mention a few words, and it can be regarded as repaying his favor." Man Bao was refreshed and excited. "Why do you owe him a favor? She likes to hear people tell stories the most." Imperial Dr. Lu glanced at her and said, "Dr. Zhou, not everyone is as lucky as you. I was almost 40 when I entered the Imperial Hospital. I started as a medical assistant. I worked as a young imperial doctor in the palace for 5 years before I could treat the concubines in the palace. After another 4 years, I was able to take the pulse of the empress and concubine. See your majesty for a pulse during your shift." The servant boy not only served as a clerk with the queen, but also served at the queen mother's place for a long time. Lu Tai said, "Once the little old man made a small mistake, the servant boy quietly helped me to cover it up. Originally, he didn't do it, and no one may have found it, but there is no trivial matter in the palace. Once it is found, whether I can save my head is another matter. The position of imperial physician will definitely be gone. Naturally, it's good once and for all. Besides, he is a person in the Queen Mother's palace, and he didn't take me for meritorious service. This is kindness." Man Bao asked curiously, "What little mistake did you make?" "I won't tell you." Imperial Dr. Lu smiled at her, "How can I tell others about the mistakes I've made? You tell me, I will not tell anyone else." Dr. Lu still shook his head. "Dr. Zhou, it's not that I can't trust you, but it's a harmless little mistake. What's the point of it? Anyway, you know that we have such a relationship. By the way, it's my turn to take a bath tomorrow. Do you want me to give him a message?" Man Bao felt a pain in his heart and became sad. He was no longer interested in the mistakes made by Imperial physician Lu. "I haven't rested for 2 decades. Imperial Dr. Lu comforted her and said, "Didn't Xiao Yuan Zheng say that, when this matter is over, I will give you and Imperial Dr. Lu a long vacation? You have saved all the rest during this time, and will send them to you at the same time." Man Bao's mood was much better. Imperial physician Lu urged her to make a decision. "Do you want Imperial physician Zhou to take a look?" After thinking about it, Man Bao nodded, "Okay, if he wants to see a doctor, he can find a way to come in by himself. I won't refuse the doctor. It is rare for patients with such symptoms to have a look. I wonder if Mr. Mo is interested in this case? See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2392. The servant boy really had a way to get in, and it wasn't difficult. Imperial physician Lu just went out with 2 letters in the morning, and in the afternoon, the servant boy and the servant boy came in with 2 bags. The steward who led them, and Imperial Physician Lu and Zhou Man introduced, these 2 are here to help in the kitchen. Imperial Physician Lu, they all work in the palace, and the Imperial Physician also has a lot of dealings with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Who doesn't know who? Imperial Physician Lu turned to look at Zhou Man. Zhou Man has never seen Tang's housekeeper, because she doesn't need to do the chores such as shopping at the Taiyuan hospital, and she and Tang's housekeeper rarely go to Taizhou's hospital, so naturally they don't know each other. It was the child's inner servant, and Man Bao felt that he was very familiar. The servant boy and the servant boy respectfully saluted the 2 of them, and without saying a word, they went to the house to settle down with their burdens. Even if the servant boy was sent to Zhuangzi and entered the epidemic area, he would live better than the average person. The boy's maid put away the luggage, turned around and went to make the bed for the boy's maid. The servant boy waved his hand and said, "I'm not busy, let's go see Imperial Physician Zhou first." Man Bao was standing in the yard at this time, and Imperial Physician Lu was already sitting on a chair, watching her while drinking a cup of tea. The servant boy and the servant boy came out to salute her and said with a smile, "The Imperial Physician of Zhou." Man Bao nodded, looked at the servant boy's face, and asked, "The servant boy sent me the handkerchief just to seek medical attention?" She asked directly, and the servant boy answered directly, smiling yes. Man Bao pointed at the living room and said, "Please sit down, the servant boy, I'll show you." The servant boy didn't expect Gu Zhong's face to be so big, it was just a handkerchief, and she even invited Imperial Physician Lu to send him a message. The servant boy let out a breath, thinking that this relationship is a dead, forget it, their grievance is over, no matter whether Zhou Man can cure him or not. Man Bao reached out to touch his pulse, and then touched the temperature of his hands and feet. Sure enough, there was no heat at all, and his hands were cold and cold, as if he was holding a piece of ice. Man Bao frowned slightly, and after thinking for a moment, said, "This disease, if you take too much medicine, it will accumulate poison, and it will not be good to lead to other diseases at that time." The little boy's servant on the side nodded again and again, and said, "Dr. Lu also said the same thing. Before my godfather took the medicine, he always felt that his heart was burning badly, and his cough became worse. Therefore, the servant boy did not dare to drink a lot of medicine. He only has cold symptoms now, and his cough is only a few coughs from time to time, which is not very important. If there is heat poison in the body, and the coughing makes people think that he has tuberculosis, let alone the palace, he can't even come to Huangchuang. I am afraid he will be sent directly to the Epidemic Prevention Center." The maid of the housekeeper entered the Epidemic Prevention Center, and it was basically the same as dead. Man Bao nodded slightly, "It's right to reduce the dose. You wait for me to think about it carefully. Well, I'll give you a prescription for taking a bath first, along with acupuncture, it will give you some relief." Man Bao asked Julan to get a pen and paper to write the prescription. Imperial Dr. Lu came over and asked, "Dr. Zhou, do you have any medicine?" Man Bao was stunned for a moment while holding the pen, the medicine she was using now was really not available here. She looked at the servant boy. The servant boy also frowned. He had already come in, and obviously he couldn't go out. The worst thing was that the servant boy couldn't either. The servant boy thought for a moment and then smiled, "The Imperial Physician Zhou only prescribes the prescription, and I will think of a way to deal with the medicine." Imperial Physician Lu snorted coldly, "Take the money, there are 3 checkpoints before and after, the servant boy will not be able to support it for long even if he brings enough property from the palace." Man Bao wrote down the prescription, looked up and said, "It's okay, you give me the money, and I'll let my 5th brother give it to you, and then you can buy some rice, noodles, sugar and meat, etc., and let the kitchen make snacks for you. Just feed it to the guards guarding the checkpoint." Man Bao said, "They are very cute, as long as they don't send things out, they have a very loose control over the things they send inside. The meaning of their existence is not to let the smallpox spread out of Huangchuang, nor to isolate Huangchuang. When the servant boy heard this, he immediately thanked Zhou Man. Dr. Lu. He glanced at Zhou Man coldly, turned around with a snort, and walked away. Man Bao's face was inexplicable, but he quickly smiled at the servant boy who was looking at him, and reassured him, "Don't be afraid, Imperial Physician Lu is not targeting you, he is just old, and it will be fine in a few years." The servant boy, who had already seen his face, stared at Zhou Man. After a while, he smiled and asked, "What Zhou Tai means is that Dr. Lu Tai is ill." Man Bao nodded, "This kind of disease is not easy to cure, you have to follow the other person and try to please him as much as possible. If things go wrong in work and life, you will easily become irritable. Xiao Yuanzheng had a good time before, but it will be fine soon. It's just that Imperial Physician Lu lasted a little longer. Ever since she met Imperial Physician Lu, his temper has not been better. At first, she thought he hated her and didn't like interacting with him for a while, but after she had to interact with him, she found out that he had a bad temper. Man Bao checked a lot of classics, and finally determined that he was old enough. All right. Man Bao copied the prescriptions again, one for the servant boy to keep, and one for Julan, folded and placed in the purse, give it to the cake, and let her hand it out with fried rice cakes tomorrow morning. Julan responded with a smile and said, "Miss, we will eat fried rice cakes tomorrow, what will we eat the day after tomorrow?" Man Bao sighed, "It seems that it's Osman Thus Cake's turn. I don't like Osman Thus Cake very much, but I have no other choice at the moment, just eat Osman Thus Cake." Imperial Physician Lu came over with the medicine box and called her, "Don't think about what to eat, someone just came to report that someone was burned out." When Man Bao heard this, he immediately dropped his pen and got up, rushed out to the yard next door, and shouted, "Zibing, quickly bring my medicine box." Zibing rushed over with the medicine box. Man Bao took it, put on a mask, and hurried into the ward area with Imperial Physician Lu, where neither Zibing nor Julan could come in. The patient with a high fever was a patient with the label 121. He developed 5 pimples, but at this time Thai Physician Lu pulled down the front of his clothes and found that there were pimples all over his chest. Man Bao picked up his arm to take a look, and found that there were more than a dozen red dots on his arm. The two looked at each other and were a little surprised. They were all too familiar with this situation. This was the vicious smallpox. Seeing that he was already twitching, Man Bao immediately opened the medicine box and took out the needle bag to give him a needle. Imperial Physician Lu also quickly instructed the waiter, "Go to the pharmacy immediately and get the medicine bag on the first row on the left, and boil a pear. Bring the medicine." Then he took out a pill, glanced at his face, dissolved the pill, and poured it directly into him. Imperial Physician Lu glanced at Zhou Man, and still instructed humanity, "Go get cold water. I can only use cold water to cool down a little, and people are now convulsing with fever. See you at 9. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2393. The two of them were busy with acupuncture, injection, and cooling with cold water. They finally stopped smoking, but their body temperature was still very high. Imperial Physician Lu has already dug out his records, and after reading it carefully, he said, "It was normal until today, he developed 5 poxes, and he is slowly maturing. Before, he had a low-grade fever, and he has no fever today." He showed the record to Zhou Man. It was checked by Imperial Physician Lu in the morning, and no problem was found. Man Bao looked at it, frowned and asked the person who was in the same room with him, "When did he have an abnormality?" The other 5 people had already shrunk aside and stayed far away, as if they were afraid of being infected, but they had already developed pimples themselves. One person shivered and said, "Just after lunch, we were fine when we ate." He just scratched the pimple on his arm and said that we should be able to go out in a few days. We listened to the adults and went out to bask in the sun after eating. After walking around the neighborhood, we came back to take a nap. When we got up, we found that he was humming. When we reached out and touched it, it was hot, and we immediately reported it to the outside world. Is in charge. Imperial physician Lu secretly calculated the time and found that there should be no delay, so he nodded to Zhou Man. So the two of them were even more worried, which showed that he was very ill. As for the disease of smallpox, they are afraid that it will spread slowly, and they will be late, but they are also afraid that it will spread too fast and be too urgent, and it will give light to people's foundation in one fell swoop. Imperial physician Lu thought for a moment and then said to the steward, "Go and make room for the 5 of them to move out." Man Bao began to write the recipe, listed all the things that might be used, and handed it over to the steward, "Let people bring these medicines and things here." She turned her head and said to Imperial physician Lu, "We live here tonight." Imperial physician Lu could only nod his head, otherwise what else could he do? He instructed the steward, "Go out and instruct someone to bring in the bedclothes of Imperial physician Zhou and I. He doesn't want to sleep on the bed that other people have slept in." The steward hurriedly bowed in response and left quickly. The two sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the patient on the bed together. After thinking about it, Man Bao still carefully picked up his hand, rolled up his sleeves and looked at the wound where he was vaccinated. The 5 pimples near the wound were now red and bulging, and they didn't look like they were about to go away before. Man Bao stretched out his fingers and lightly pressed the pimple, frowned and said, "It's hard, like a newborn." Imperial Dr. Lu flipped through the booklet and said in a bad mood, "This patient has not only been examined by Imperial Dr. Lu, but also by Imperial Dr. Zheng, and there is also our signature on it. It was clearly fine at the time. How can you suddenly get pimples all over your body, and you have such a rush?" Man Bao asked, "What size cow was the cowpox planted for him?" Imperial physician Lu turned the page forward again, "Cow number 3. Speaking of this, Imperial physician Lu paused and frowned slightly, "But everyone in this ward is inoculated with cowpox number 3 like him, not only him, but also in these nearby wards." Man Bao reached out and touched his forehead, thinking that the medicine was about to take effect. He simply stood up and said, "Send someone over to watch, let's go see the others." Imperial physician Lu could only go out with her, leaving 2 people here to guard him. The soldiers who guarded them were those soldiers who had been vaccinated from the western regions. They had already developed acne and were not afraid of being infected again. They knew Zhou Man well, and they saluted her first as soon as they came in. Imperial physician Lu has hurried to the side. Man Bao nodded to them and trotted to chase after Imperial Dr. Lu. The two checked all the people in the nearby ward, felt the pulse, looked at the tongue, and carefully looked at the pimples on their bodies. They reached out and pressed them. There was no problem, and they were indeed slowly maturing. 2 have even started to scab over and should heal in 2 days. So Man Bao and Imperial physician Lu were worried, is this the only case, or is there such a person hidden among the many cases? Man Bao asked, "How many people have been vaccinated by cow no 3? Imperial physician Lu flipped through the record and said, 65. That's a lot, and they only checked 23 people. Man Bao frowned slightly and looked up at the sunset. It's getting dark. Imperial physician Lu was also worried. He turned around twice, but still said, "Let someone tell Xiao Yu and Zheng, if there are people with high fever at night, we can't deal with it. First check the person with number 3 cowpox, and others will also check." Such a detailed inspection, the 2 of them are simply not enough. Man Bao could only nod his head. So Imperial physician Lu went to call someone. The two of them ate dinner at the entrance of the ward. They ate nutritious meals for the patients, a sea bowl the size of a face, with rice in it and a lot of vegetables on it. Imperial Physician Lu was so sleepy that he had a bad appetite. After eating half a bowl, he looked up and saw that Joe Man, who was squatting on the side, had already eaten up all the food and was pulling the wall of the bowl. Sticky grains of rice. Dr. Lu. He sighed, put down the bowl and stopped eating. Man Bao looked at him sympathetically, poured him a glass of water, then picked up the teapot and poured a bowl of water into her own sea bowl, and she held the bowl and squatted aside to suck the water. Dr. Lu looked at her while taking a sip of water. Dr. Zhou, you have such an appetite, why don't I check your body? Man Bao said, I also want to check it for you. She swept the bowl on the ground with a look of sympathy. Dr. Lu, even my father, can eat a big bowl of rice now. When Zhou's family was having wedding wine, he had to go to the banquet as a colleague. He had seen old Zhutu. When he thought of old Zhutu's age, Dr. Lu's face darkened, and he turned around and left, ignoring her. Dr. Zhou, go to work when you're full. The two only went to see the patient in one room, and before the examination was over, the soldier who was staring at patient number 121 ran and said, Dr. Zhou, it seems that people are getting hotter and hotter, and he's twitching again. Man Bao and Imperial Physician Lu immediately went over, and after seeing the person, Imperial Physician Lu said helplessly, we can only do acupuncture again. He looked at the time on the hourglass, frowned and thought for a while, and finally, after touching his body temperature, he gritted his teeth and said, give him another dose of medicine. Man Baodao, it's only been an hour since the last injection. Imperial Dr. Lu saw that he was already twitching, and while holding down his hands and feet to help him fix the needle for Joe Man, he said, irrigation. He's burned out now, and looking at the speed at which the pimples appear on his body, if he doesn't inject medicine, I'm afraid it'll be gone in a while. Man Bao stopped talking, and Imperial Physician Lu immediately sent someone to bring the medicine. The medicine has been hot in the kitchen, and as soon as it is called here, the medicine is brought over immediately. Imperial Physician Lu was about to fill the medicine, when Xiao Yuanzhang, who was busy with dust, arrived with Imperial Physician Lu. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2394. The two of them stepped forward to take a look, and immediately said, put the medicine. If this dose doesn't work, give it a strong medicine. Man Bao raised her head in shock. This was the first time she heard from Xiao Yuanzheng that she was going to take tiger and wolf medicine. Xiao Yuan's face was very calm. After Zhou Man got the needle, everyone looked down at the person lying on the bed. He is shaking. Man Bao's face changed, and he immediately took off the two needles from his body, and then held down his head and slowly pierced them in, but the person was still getting hotter, and more pimples appeared on his body. Xiao Yuanzhen's face became darker and darker, and he said, first prescribe medicine to suppress the acne, and then give it a strong medicine. So the four of them discussed the medicine to be added. Xiao Yuan was writing down the prescription and handing it over to Zhou Man. You and Imperial Physician Lu will get the medicine in person. Man Bao looked worriedly at the needle on his body. Xiao Yuanzheng said, you have even pierced these two needles. Is there any other better needle method? Keep it. I can watch it with Imperial Dr. Lu. Man Bao took the prescription and went out with Imperial Physician Lu, carrying a dim yellow lantern to the medicine hall to get medicine. Imperial Physician Lu complained softly as he walked, why didn't you write these types together when you took the medicine in the afternoon? Man Bao said depressedly, we didn't even think about giving him such a medicine. Imperial Physician Lu comforted her and said, if he burns like this, even if he doesn't need strong medicine, he will probably burn stupidly. It's only possible. Imperial Physician Lu shook his head and sighed, I remember him, He is already 21 years old, not a child. It is very difficult to survive with such a high fever at this age. You have even given him a life-saving needle, and you have done your best." It was only at this moment that Man Bao realized that Xiao Yuan was pointing at her, meaning of coming out to get the medicine. Her eyes reddened. "Are you sure that he won't survive? Isn't this a precautionary measure?" In fact, it is not a precaution, because the possibility of his survival is just in case. Man Bao went to the medicine hall to grab the herbs. After thinking about it, he simply grabbed all the medicines in the medicine hall, and then took the medicine and went directly to the kitchen to be boiled. When the two returned to the ward, Xiao Yuanzheng and Imperial Physician Lu were still standing as before, but when they saw the two returning, they sighed and shook their heads. Man Bao immediately ran up to take a look, and saw that the hand was still twitching slightly, and the needle on his body was stuck, but as soon as she opened his eyelids, she saw that the pupils had been dilated. There was a water basin on the side. Xiao Yuanzhen's sleeves were all wet. He must be trying to cool him down and get wet. Man Bao silently retracted the hand supporting his eyelids, but still reluctantly touched his pulse. She turned around, still not thinking of a good solution. She had encountered this situation many times when she was in Xiaohu. At that time, she was already numb. When one died, she didn't have time to be sad, so she continued to see the next one. The living is always more important than the dead, but now she feels powerless and sad, so sad that she can't react and tears fall down drop by drop. Xiao Yuanzheng was also in a bad mood, but he could only say, "Take the needle." The person on the bed had stopped moving, not even breathing, so Man Bao could only take out the needle. But they couldn't just sit down. They checked the remaining patients overnight with the lights on, and found out that 2 of them were abnormal. They were to be transferred to a ward alone and then consulted together. Xiao Yuan was carefully looking at their acne spots under the lamp. It was indeed a little red, and when they touched their body temperature again, it was a little higher than the others. Xiao Yuan is checking the records of their vaccinations, which are also the vaccinia of number 3 cowpox. He exhaled, turned around and took someone out, walked around the yard twice and said, "Is there a problem with the vaccinia of cow no 3? Man Bao said, "Because it has more acne, so the toxicity is also stronger." "Are you sure they were all mature acne scabs when you collected them?" Man Bao glanced at Imperial Physician Lu and nodded. That cow was collected by the 2 of them together, and they had all checked before collecting it. They had seen so many smallpox, and it was impossible to admit it was wrong. Xiao Yuan turned around twice, still a little undecided. "Do you want to prescribe medicine now to stop it from appearing, or let it come out?" After thinking about it, Man Bao said, "The principle of vaccination is to let them get smallpox, and only those who have had smallpox can be immune to smallpox, so they should be treated like ordinary smallpox patients, right?" Dr. Lu also thinks so. Xiao Yuanzheng closed his eyes and said, "Okay, let's prescribe the medicine." He said, "Even if we let them get acne, that's under our control." The other 3 were refreshed upon hearing this, and followed Xiao Yuanzheng to discuss the prescription. Xiao Yuanzheng said to Zhou Man, "Now their temperature is not very high, it is not easy to suppress them with medication, so let's use acupuncture and moxibustion first." Man Bao nodded, and discussed the needle method with them, mainly because of her suggestion, and they helped the staff. After the confirmation, Man Bao went in and gave them medicine. It was early in the morning, and the 2 of them knew that someone in the ward was seriously ill with a high fever. Man Bao took a clean needle bag and said to them, "Don't be afraid, your temperature is higher than others, and I will cool you down with acupuncture." While comforting them, Man Bao gave them needles and asked, "Do you feel any discomfort in your body?" The 2 looked at each other and said with some fear, I feel a little itchy on my body, and my head is a little dizzy." After putting all the needles in, Man Bao looked at the place they said itchy, and she could vaguely see a red spot. Man Bao frowned slightly, feeling a little uneasy in his heart. He was in such a hurry. Could it be because the cows were also like this when they had acne? Man Bao loosened his brows, turned around and twisted the needles for the two of them. After estimating that it was almost time, he took the needles. Xiao Yuan Zheng also boiled the prescription they had discussed, and the two of them drank a bowl each. At this moment, the sky was bright. Xiao Yuan looked out and said to the two patients, "Go to sleep, there is a special person to watch over you, no big deal." The two patients glanced at each other and both lay down a little nervously, but they tossed along for half the night before they drank the medicine. As soon as the drowsiness came on, they couldn't hold back, and fell into a deep sleep as soon as they tilted their heads. Man Bao waited for them to fall asleep before he stepped forward and lifted the clothes on their arms to signal that Xiao Yuan was watching them. They took the lamp and looked carefully, and sure enough, the skin was a little red, and when I touched the temperature again, it was still a little hot. The four of them exited cautiously. Xiao Yuan Zheng had no better way to do it. The doctor is also a human. He wanted to cure people with a wave of his hand, but at this moment, he really had to wait, waiting for the smallpox to come out of their bodies. Tricks, they can match the corresponding tricks. Man Bao told his guess, and Xiao Yuan Zheng said, "Dr. Lu and Imperial Dr. Lu go to check the records of the number 3 cow, and Imperial Dr. Zhou and I are here to guard." Another steward was summoned and said, "Take my letter to the person guarding outside, and say that Imperial Dr. Lu and I will not go to the Imperial Hospital today." The steward responded, bowed to accept the letter, and walked back. Man Bao grabbed a piece of wood and sat on it. Xiao Yuan Zheng was sitting on the stone beside him. It was a little cold, but he didn't want to move. The two didn't speak for a while. "I think you guys would prefer to read 2 chapters at a time, so I just finished it and posted it, half an hour late." "Okay, day 1 is over, see you tomorrow."